Hello and welcome everyone to this Berbyuk seminar. Today it's Dina and Nataliya from my sister department who are going to talk about communication study they've done with a few companies at the software center. So without further ado, the floor is yours. You tell me when to flip the slides. Welcome, Dina and Nataliya.
Thank you, Miroslav.
Thank you very much. Welcome and thanks for checking in to our session and where we're going to talk about our research on metrics and team communication. We're really excited to share with you the study results and the insights we've been able to make. And I'm trying to let people in as I go. So as you can see here, we have an
Turn off Roblox.
Nothing's playing right now.
We have
Nej.
Men andra säger turn off roll, då säger det inte riktigt sens.
Okay, we'll start muting people now. Dina, you're muted now.
There we go. Okay.
Yep.
So I hope you got the introduction. Again, welcome everybody. So we're going to take you on to the journey of our research, what it is about, what we have done, and what we have arrived at in terms of results and outcomes. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So it's been a really nice collaboration again between Nataliya, Miroslav, Wilhelm, Ola, and myself. I'm from the Department of Applied IT. Nataliya is from the communications side of digitalization. And then we have Miroslav. And then, of course, our industry collaborators who's been instrumental in helping us to facilitate the research. Right, we can move on. So if we're setting the stage here, this is actually about understanding the soft skills or the soft topics of software development. And in this, of course, studying communication is extremely essential. It's actually very, very important and a cornerstone of organizing our work. And there's 3 points or bullet points that helps us to understand this. So what it does, communication, if we look at it from this perspective, it supports the building of our relationships with one another in projects or in any situation where we actually work together. In terms of understanding metrics development, we have the interplay between metrics team and stakeholders, but also the interaction with managers. Good communication or effective communication also is essential to understand how people engage and how we can create true commitment and trust across different projects. And it also sets the scene for continuing the work. And as you've seen, you have got experience of transitioning into agile way of working. It's more emphasis on face-to-face communication and communication in general. So it really shows the importance of communication in getting work done. And this is really the core. Right? So, the vision that we have set ourselves in doing this research is that ultimately is for us to understand and improve communication between metrics team and stakeholders, and that has been within the context of 2 software development organizations or 2 technology-based organizations, which are Axis and Ericsson. So the main question then that's been guiding our research throughout this year or perhaps it's a bit more than a year, has been what are the challenges that metrics teams experience when communicating with stakeholders? So a simple question with quite complex and interesting and insightful results. At least we think that. So how have we actually conducted this research? Of course, we had two different organizational settings. The first has been Access, and the company has been Ericsson. And of course, in terms of understanding metric service delivery, these two companies represent one company that has worked with metrics for many, many years, that's Ericsson, and one company that has a more recent history and are developing their measurement process. That's Access. So we have managed to have a lot of in-depth interviews with both metric team members, team leaders, and stakeholders across these two companies. We also had the opportunity to run workshops where we have been able to relay results and further refine our findings and themes to really be able to say and understand what is actually specific about the communication challenges in metric service delivery. Okay. So in understanding this, of course, we also realize that we need to be clear about what stakeholders are across these two contexts. So within the literature, for instance, we became acutely aware that stakeholders is defined as an individual or organization having a right, share, claim, or interest in a system or in its possession of characteristics that meet their needs and expectations. One interview then also showed us that who is a stakeholder? Well, that's anyone who needs metrics. But as we have done the research, we have got a more refined understanding, both what the team metrics is in terms of an organization, the different roles within the team, but also that the definition of stakeholders in reality is not that straightforward. So even understanding who is our stakeholders is very, very essential and sometimes challenging, right? So all in all, before we lead you on to our results, we maybe need to take a step back to understand what is a successful measurement process. What does it mean to be successful in this particular context? So three things has come out as important, and that's firstly to understand and respect the role and function of the team, the metrics team, and that's about understanding and getting a sense of that they actually have an identity, that they are really important in what the organization does, and their outputs in developing these information products actually helps the whole organization to become successful. And that it's very important to establish good relationship between metric teams, members and the stakeholders. And it sounds straightforward, but things can always become better. And again, these projects live within a very dynamic and quite complex context. So it's about how do we actually navigate to become even better in delivering these type of complex software products. And of course, the importance of having adequate resources and equipment. Technology is always important. And from this perspective, we tend to talk about these kind of processes in terms that they are socio-technical. You need to understand the social processes, but you also need to understand the technology used, and that these two together has to function effectively so that we get the desired results. Yes. So Nataliya.
Well, now it's my turn.
Yes.
Well, maybe you've heard about Carl Weick, who says that communication is the core process of organizing, and it's a mechanism for developing and maintaining relationships as best as ensuring the work is to be completed. So the question is, how do we analyze communication? How do we explore communication? Communication is a tool. So in order to understand what works and what doesn't work, we need to understand what people are doing. And in this project, we made an attempt to relate communication to measurement process mode. So we looked at, okay, what is the work of metrics team? What do they do? What do they have to deliver? And we made an attempt to relate the challenges that metrics teams and stakeholders experience to the measurement process model, which is presented here. We looked at different stages, different parts of this process, and we asked ourselves this question, okay, what challenges do they experience, for example, during prepare for measurement? What challenges do they experience when they perform measurement and evaluate measurement? So we looked at different parts of the process, and we made an attempt to understand what challenges do people experience, what works and what doesn't work. So in this case, it's if we understand the process and the communication, we can have a good chance to help people to solve those challenges. We can take the next slide. So what are our results? And first, we will tell you a little bit about the challenges, and then we are going to discuss some solutions or potential solutions to those challenges. Tina.
Thank you. So the first challenge that we have been able to observe is related to the importance of aligning expectations. And I think that, I mean, personally, this is one of my favorite themes because it cuts across literally everything we do. And it's so evident in the way we perceive success of projects in terms of how well we are able to align expectations, and when they are disaligned across a project, how we manage to actually align them. And I think this is what we tend to do all the time without actually thinking about it. So from this perspective, it is actually a social process that helps us to build clarity about what's needed, what type of information, for instance, is needed to develop metrics. And I think the most tricky thing, and this is really evident in our interviews and talks with practitioners, is that there are always stated and unstated expectations. And we tend to take for granted that we understand what we need. But also part of this is that in terms of developing metrics, we don't always obviously know what we want or what we need. So this is also an important aspect. In terms of aligning expectations, it's also about the expectations we have in terms of who's doing what and what responsibilities we have. And again, you know, in busy times, we don't always take time out to have these conversations, to ask these questions. So, and that could potentially lead to problems later on. If we look at it from a metrics team perspective, we have put it along the lines that stakeholders take little or no responsibility for specifying a request, simply protecting this responsibility to the team, leaving team members to guess what they need. This is one instance, one example of perceptions that we have been able to see. On the stakeholder side, sometimes there are problems formulating requests. And that's simply, and that's natural because it's not always easy to know what type of information is needed, what type of metrics is needed. And of course, that then leads to the importance of actually talking with one another to try to establish and put this puzzle on what's actually needed. And perhaps then, whose responsibility is it then to align these expectations? And it's clearly in this agile way of working, is obviously everybody's responsibility in a way. Right? Challenge 2.
Prioritizing demands. And I think it's a common challenge to everyone in many different teams. I can imagine even if you're working with you're not working with metrics, but something else in your team, you need to manage different demands from different people, from other teams, from management, and it's a part of our life. And communication is actually a powerful tool for communicating priorities, for managing priorities. We don't think about that, but how we communicate priorities has a tremendous influence on what is done and what is not going to be done. So in our research, we realized that it's a very challenging environment that metrics teams in both organizations they work with, and communication in relation to priorities is a challenge. And there are 3 main reasons. Maybe some of you recognize them again from your work. First of all is the changes in task priorities from stakeholders. So one day you get a request, well, you have to do this, but this deadline. But in 2 days, you get another request saying, oh, you just need to make this small change. And it's not so difficult, just do it right now. And a team member might think, well, it's not so small change. So he or she needs to leave the work he's doing at this moment and needs to do something else. And of course, it creates stress and disruption, and you lose you're not so concentrated. And sometimes you feel like, well, I don't really have control of my work situation. The second one is inconsistent use of communication channels. We all use different digital tools right now. I mean, we use Teams, we use Zoom, for example, the university email chat and other functions. But unfortunately, I mean, though it's absolutely useful in many situations that you can get in touch with a person, but at the same time, sometimes you need to have a rule in what way you communicate, what channels you use for communicating, for example, requests. So if there is an agreement that ticketing system is to be used and it's not used, but instead a stakeholder, for example, comes to the metrics teams in person and says, well, you need to stop this, you need to take my project first. It creates all, possible conflicts and stress. So there is a challenge here for metrics team, but even for other stakeholders who feel, well, this stakeholder gets priority, but we send our request via ticketing system and we don't get prioritized. So what is the problem? How should we communicate? And it creates tensions and it creates conflicts. The third reason is a conflict in priorities between metrics team, stakeholders, and management. And we could observe it in one of the companies. The problem is that delivering metrics is a very complex process, and you work with a stakeholder. And in both organizations, metrics teams work really hard to meet the expectations of stakeholders to deliver the metrics needed. But sometimes the management asks to follow a roadmap, a plan. In simple terms, it's a plan what should be delivered. And very often it's very difficult to follow this rigid roadmap, which doesn't reflect the nature of metrics teamwork, because sometimes you need to spend maybe more time on this part of work, but less than another part of work. So having a rigid roadmap doesn't really work for them. And according to our respondents, following roadmaps might even conflict the demands from stakeholders. So basically, you, as a team member, you don't really know what to do. Listen to stakeholder, follow the request from stakeholder, or follow the roadmap. So of course, during this presentation, we'll not go into details, but it's a challenge for Matrix team members to find this kind of solution. Okay, what should we do? How we can organize our work? Whom should we prioritize? And it's something that I'm not sure whether you experience it in your work, but this is something that creates much stress and conflict in many cases. Thank you.
Regular feedback. Now, I think that most of us can relate to the importance of it, but in many cases, there is always the need for perhaps more frequent feedback. It's also, of course, how we relay that feedback and making time for it. So in this particular context, it's about relaying information about the status of the metric in terms of where are we in terms of time. Do we need to review pieces of information? Do we need to improve parts of the process? Are there any updates that needs to be shared and that could affect the development process? From our data then, we've seen indications that what's also important is to relay feedback on how the actual metrics are being used. And this type of feedback loop has importance for perhaps motivation and continuing to deliver innovative metrics and perhaps being able to work together. So the regular feedback part serves both to improve the actual product, but also improve the social glue, if you like, within the team, but also between the team members and their stakeholders. So I think that in a sense, this might seem like a challenge that we know of, but it keeps coming back again and again. So there is something here that means that we have to work harder to make the regular feedbacks. And then over to the fourth and final challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think for this presentation, we mentioned the absolutely main challenges, and continuous dialogue, it actually related to feedback challenge. Basically that people need to have continuous contact between metrics teams and stakeholders. It's essential in order to reduce this feedback cycle. And to some extent, some of our respondents felt that they're working in a vacuum, that there were no arenas for formal or informal discussions during the process of during the measurement process, which was quite difficult because sometimes you need to have a dialogue, need to talk, okay, am I going to the right direction? So if you relate to the first challenge about aligning expectations, you can see that having a continuous dialogue and feedback, it's essential for creating this shared understanding and to align expectations. Unfortunately, due to different reasons, our participants experienced that was a challenge, and two common reasons were geographical dispersion, sitting in different places, and it doesn't mean that you need to sit a stakeholder is in China and you're in Gothenburg. It's enough you're sitting in two different buildings and you don't really come and talk to each other. Maybe right now pandemic it changed it a lot, and it would be interesting to see about geographical dispersion and COVID-19 experiences and how it influenced this openness and willingness to have a continuous dialogue between people, but also language and cultural differences. When we have stakeholders and metrics team members coming from different cultural backgrounds and linguistics backgrounds, though people are great at speaking English and have report experiencing no problems in their working life. Well, we just use English, no problems. But we got quite many comments that using English in, for example, Jira ticketing system is quite complicated because you need to formulate your request in a good way that another person can understand that. And it's very short communication. You lack bodily communication, you lack gestures, which help enormously in daily life to understand each other. So it becomes quite challenging. So sometimes you ask a question and you don't get an answer, or you get the wrong answer, or you don't understand what answer you got. So it requires many different iterations, much communication. So this is something that is an obstacle, but at the same time, many respondents enjoyed working with people from other countries, enjoyed learning about different ways of making things done. So it's a challenge, but at the same time, something that some of our respondents really enjoyed working with. Yeah, summary. So these are those 4 challenges. But here in this table, so we show that some of those challenges are common to certain parts of measurement process. For example, aligning expectations, prioritizing demands are common for in the phases of prepare for measurement and perform measurement, while regular feedback was mainly mentioned in evaluate measurement process. Those themes are time-bound themes in research. When you talk about thematic content analysis, in this case, you define the themes that are common in some parts of activities, but not other. And also transversal themes when we have a continuous dialogue, which is common throughout the measurement process. You take the next one. Mitigation of communication challenges. Is Wilhelm here? Wilhelm?
Yes, I'm here.
And Ola? Yeah, because I think that...
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. This is a result of collaboration between academic people and people from the organizations. This is this communication model, which presents actually what you should do to at least to ensure to some extent that communication works, that communication between stakeholder and metrics team member can work in the best possible way. Maybe you should mention just a couple of words about each point here.
Well, I've been working with metrics since, well, for over 17 years now, officially that is, and research 15, 16 years in the area of metrics. And one thing that I've not changed until today is the perception that metrics, they are about people. And finally, we got it on picture.
And I think we'll let this picture stay as it is because that people can look at it. And Dina and me will just mention a couple of words about each part here, each element.
Okay, so this is a mental model you want to have in your mind all of the time when working in projects. Well, in order to achieve those kind of values, we want good collaboration, trust, productivity, innovation, efficiency, engagement, and general well-being in the workplace. There is a constant interplay with these kind of ways of improving communication and relationships. The first one, defining purpose and tasks, again, is about really understanding and having a shared understanding what is the task we are supposed to do and clarifying that. And perhaps in the context of metrics, it's about specification of tasks. Maybe you need to ensure you use the same type of templates, establishing a particular communication challenge. Are we going to use Jira or not? So it's quite sort of the hygiene factors of getting started and trying to establish that early on, not just hit the ground running, which is very easily done in projects. Very closely connected is obviously the clarifying of roles and responsibilities. Who does what? Formalizing roles. Who is our stakeholder? What is the team leader's role, the data scientist role? And having these brief conversations.
Yeah, and now about regular communication. I really miss my whiteboard. So I made those kind of things that you can see my handwriting. But just for you to, you can go back just a second. That you have to think about planning your communication. Should think about making a communication plan for stakeholders. And a good idea to do if you are unsure what stakeholder expectations are, that you make a stakeholder mapping and stakeholder engagement plan, that you actually have an idea, your team has an idea what expectations your stakeholders have. The second thing is active participation, that you feel that you in your team feel that you're part of organization, you know what your mission and vision are. In this case, you have to foster this professional identity, understanding the role, for example, in our case, metrics team, which was not completely clear according to some participants. And it can, if you know, okay, what is my role? What do I contribute to organization? It will help you to understand how to communicate with stakeholders in best possible way, how to align to stakeholders' expectations.
So connecting to that, it's the importance of celebrating wins. And this is very closely connected to cultivating a metrics culture. It's about realizing that this is a very important source for motivation for team members. Knowing that we have reached a particular milestone, knowing that whatever we developed is actually working, all the good effort that has been put into a project is being rewarded. I mean, who's done over and above what they're asked to do in a project, and to actually celebrate the small things, not only sort of the big events that. So in that respect, instilling that in the culture of developing a good metrics culture.
Yeah, and the final is that we talked about metrics, but in our interviews, some respondents working with metrics said like, what is metrics? Why do we need metrics? This is something that I would like to point out at the very end of this presentation, that it's important to develop understanding what you're doing. What is the purpose of your work? Developing glossary around metrics. How do we call different types of metrics? And this is something that is a challenge, because if you call things, different teams call things in different ways, it's very difficult to align expectations, which leads to problems. So I think that time is almost up. So I think we go to the last slide.
So what can we conclude from this? Well, as we mentioned from the beginning, that we have to acknowledge that metrics delivery is a socio-technical process. It means it's complex. We have a social side. We need social skills as well as technical skills. And we need to marry these two and be aware of them, right? It's about understanding that the importance of clarifying the place and role of metrics teams in an organization, that needs to be communicated, because that is really linked to power and mandate and also motivation. And also that stakeholders are equally important as the metrics teams in this service delivery process, and that we acknowledge that as well. And of course, the managing expectations is in a way running through all of this. I mean, we want to avoid saying we're going to deliver a Mercedes and then on the other side comes a Skoda. So that we need sometimes these metaphors to think about how can we get the expectations right on the start. And even though we don't get the expectations right, how can we actually get this alignment, which then can yield to better project outcomes and better relationships in the end. And of course, underlying all of this is that everybody, we're all in it together. It needs active participation from everyone, and that it's all about how can we get our work done in the best possible way.